Part of your very gracious welcome, Nancy and Mark and Jim and all of you MCC, is a little bit about me. I'm from South Georgia, and I'm about as Methodist as you can get. We have Methodist clergy in my family for almost every generation back through the Civil War. And let's be clear, my family was not on the right side of history on that. So where I'm from, there are like a total of 7 liberal Methodists. 4 of them are my family. And there might be like 10 in all of South Georgia. And as Mark made clear, like Methodists aren't super liberal in general. They're kind of like really shoddy at being like good humans in general. So these 10 people, besides my family, are pretty quiet in how liberal they are. Like, they're never gonna stand on the floor of the Methodist conference and say something that pushes against the status quo. They might vote against it, but those votes are anonymous. So they're not ever gonna have their privilege checked. They won't ever jeopardize their standing the way Gary did. But all 10 of us, we kind of have to get along, and we all know who each other is. Because it's not exactly a strength in numbers thing, it's mostly just survival. Kind of a not losing hope against this immovable wall that is Southern conservatism and the Methodist Church. So imagine my surprise when I moved to Boston about 5 years ago, and I found out, shock of all shocks, that not all liberals like each other. It's actually something I'm still struggling with. Not only not all liberals like each other, they don't even get along. And most of the thing that I've learned is that liberals are most critical of other liberals. Basically, they're just trying to like out-liberal each other. Now, on one hand, this is great, and I can talk about this personally because my sermons are A, usually not very happy, and B, are something I probably need to hear first and foremost. So I learned that my liberalism needed to be expanded when I came to Boston. I was really cool with some Jesus blood language, some Father God language, and super ableist language. So there were things that I had just never thought of before, and my privilege needed to be checked on that a lot. And I'm grateful for people who teach me and continue to teach me in that. But still, there's still a lot of infighting. This inability to do things together because someone was not liberal enough or some other silly reason, and they fail to do things at all. We are not able to be moved to action because we don't agree on something. And this is not to say that you have to agree on everything. I think diversity of opinion is just as beautiful as every other kind of diversity. But at least we could be united in some common good. And so when I think of that, I keep hearing Isaiah calling to the people of Israel as if Isaiah was God. They seek me day after day, desiring knowledge of my ways, like a nation acting righteously, that didn't abandon their God. They ask me for righteous judgments, wanting to be close to God. Why don't we fast? We don't see you. We afflict ourselves. You don't notice. Third, Isaiah is writing to a post-exilic community. Some of these people have returned to Jerusalem. Some remain in the lands where they were exiled generations ago. The latter, the people who remained, are super suspicious of the former. How dare you return there? The returnees are not welcoming to anyone outside of their community. Basically, it's a whole bunch of people really concerned with doing the Lord's work, not really doing a very good job at it. One wants to rebuild Jerusalem, like Ezra and Nehemiah, and the other is committed to live in exile, like the prophet Jeremiah said in chapter 29. Both groups are kind of like, dear God, don't you see how good we are? We're fasting and like doing your work. You're welcome. We're doing all of this church stuff, and it's like not working. You aren't making us the clear winner. Now, if I thought that God had a body, this would be where I would imagine God like face palms or eye rolls and is like, are you kidding me right now, y'all? Because God has a southern accent, right?
Absolutely.
They seek me day after day, desiring knowledge of my ways, like a nation acting righteously. That's for righteous judgments. Wanting to be close to God. Basically, what I hear God saying is, y'all better check yourself before you wreck yourself. Because if you are asking for my judgments, oh, I'm going to give them to you. Like, y'all, come on. You vocalize a desire to be close to me, but despite all of this, you have failed the people. Isn't this the fast I choose? Didn't I tell you the first time? So the prophet Isaiah says, let me say it a little louder for the people in the back. Isn't this the fast I choose for you, to release the wicked restraints, to set the mistreated free, to share bread with the hungry and housing for the homeless, to clothe the naked and treat all as your family? Only then is your light going to break forth like the dawn, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. That is not about proper worship or proper talk, proper beliefs, or even proper liberal convictions. About what the Lord desires. This is about proper action. If you remove the yoke from among you, that finger pointing, that wicked speech, if you open your heart to the hungry and provide abundantly for those who are afflicted, your light will shine in the darkness and your gloom will be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and provide for you even in parched places. The divine will rescue your bones and you will be like a watered garden with a spring of water that will never run dry. Those two things, rescue your bones, and a spring of water that won't run dry, it reminds me of Ezekiel. When the divine takes the prophet down into the valley and says, human one, can these bones live? And Ezekiel very intelligently says, I don't know nothing. And then you've got that spring of water that won't run dry. It sounds a lot like Jesus to me. And here's where I think we get to the crux of the passage, at least for me. The heart of what the divine wanted for the people of Israel and then what God wants for us. Then they will rebuild ancient ruins on your account. Foundations of generations of past will restore. You restored, and you shall be called mender of broken walls, restorer of streets to live in. I loved the interpretation you read today, Alan. I thought that was probably just all we needed for the sermon, ready? But restorer of neighborhoods. God calls our attention higher, to what God desires, not to what we desire. This is not to some higher understanding of our theology or church worship. We are called to go higher and deeper into God's love, and in doing so, take our uplifted eyes and actually look around us for once. To look at one another and see them fully as one who has been created by God, beloved by God. Because, like it or not, the divine's vision is profoundly urban, because it is profoundly relational. This city is a scary place, especially if you come from South Georgia, from a place that your family has lived for 200 years. And every day I'm faced with a stranger. And in that is beautiful and it is terrifying and it is a reminder of communion for me. It's much easier for me to cordon myself off with my 10 liberals by myself very safely and just agree with them. I can just sit with like the small marginalized group on the side because we have a uniting experience and we can just talk about the other. But God calls us into relationship with the other. And that's much harder, and it's a higher and different relationship. I'm not saying we don't need people who have shared our common hurts and our common loves, but God calls us into something else as well. We are forced into a relationship like Christ with those who might not look like us, might not love like us. But in that, we are looking at the divine, we are looking at the stranger, and sometimes those strangers might be people we disagree with. They might even hate us. And if you're me, you might not like them in return. But it doesn't matter what these people do to fulfill what we have in God's word. We must see the other person not as enemy or stranger, but see God in that person. To make your streets livable for all people, to restore the city, to make it habitable and dignified for all persons to live in. That sounds like liberal propaganda to me, and I am a diehard liberal, and I'm not saying that you have to be a liberal to be a Christian. It's just not a bent. But I do believe what God is calling us to do is take and transform structures of oppression and inequality and make them into ones that give life. Take systems of oppression and make them into ones of well-being. If you stop trampling the Sabbath, stop trampling whatever you want to do with Mount Holy Day and consider it a delight, the Lord will honor you and you will be sustained. Mark, you kind of took my sermon from me. It's fine. The Methodist Church is really good at saying what Sabbath should look like for Methodists. When people ask me where I work, I say I work at Old West. It's a Methodist church, for better or for worse. I'm not super Methodist in my policies. I'm super Methodist in my beliefs, in that I believe in grace, and I believe a whole lot of social justice. And I also believe the Methodist Church, like I'm sure all churches in certain ways, is very flawed and very broken. And what we need to focus on is loving a stranger, loving those who are different than ourselves, seeing the face of God. The Jesus-y theology word for this is imago Dei, the image of God, the face of God in one another. And only then do we have livable streets. Only then do I think we would have to say a livable church, where the church is actually restored. Because if we look around us, this building is crumbling. It is in need of some deep, deep TLC. Lots of millions of dollars of TLC, actually. But I feel like God is asking Old West and MCC, human ones, can these bones live again? Because you will be the ones that restore these streets to live in. You, with your love, looking at the face of another, the face of the stranger, and saying, you, child, are beautiful and loved by God. That might be the hardest challenge for us, to not say it to each other, but to say it to people who might not say it back to us. Church, that is probably the hardest thing. I say that my practices, my spiritual practices, are CrossFit, petting puppies, and yelling at racists. It's a very fulfilling things for me. It's hard for me to love people who hate others that I love. And I'm not saying I do it well, but I am saying I'm willing to go on that journey with you. So I hope you will join me in that journey. Amen. Amen. Our communion hymn of preparation is Just As I Am. It's in the not the United Methodist hymnal. No.
I'm sure it's in there.
It might be in there, though. We'll find that later. It's in the MCC hymnal P48. So please rise and embody your spirit for this hymn, Just As I Am, without one plea.